How's it going, guys? John, the basic expert here. This is supposed to be, or I hope to be, the first of many types of episodes of this type where I said at the beginning of 2025, I wanted to talk about more mythology, and we've done some streams, we've done some videos, I've talked about materialism in games and mythology on a sort of a grander scale. I kind of want to zoom in and talk about monsters. Monsters are just such a big part of our games, especially when you're playing D&D. They are foes for the players to slay. They're monsters for the players to slay. They guard treasure. They make generally good antagonists. You can look up through the monster manual. You pick out a vampire, you pick out a werewolf, you pick out anything, and you can transform that into some villain that your players might or might not, I don't know, depending on how they feel about things, care about. But they definitely want to kill it, and they definitely want to take its things. And place them in a lair, place them in some place where adventure can happen, and they just monsters add the flavor, they add the spice to a dungeon that might have traps, a specific design to it, a layout change or layout variance to it. The monsters that fill it add even more character to it, maybe even the most character to the dungeon, right? And who layers in it, who lives in there, what are their relationships to each other? Do they get along? Do they not? Monsters are just they're the thing that makes D&D interesting. That's why one of the core books to D&D throughout most editions is a monster manual. Yeah, right? Even to this day, we have monster manuals. Even in 2024 D&D, we have monster manuals. So I wanted to talk about Dark Elves because Dark Elves are something that Ben Riggs had talked about recently, and his comments on Dark Elves. And Ben Riggs is a supposed D&D historian, and I disagree with his take on this, obviously, but I have to thank him at the same time because his comments got my brain going about this. And talking about monsters and their mythological origins is a super interesting concept. So Ben, thank you for saying something super silly about Dark Elves, about Drow, because it got my brain going like, this needs to be the first episode of this sort of content. And I want to make more about this, of delving into the origins of creatures and stuff like that and talking about them. So I want to read Ben's comments, and then we'll kind of go through the history, and we'll talk about Dark Elves and Drow and their origins, and I think that this will be hopefully very interesting to you. So let's start with Ben's comments. He says, ever notice how Lolth, the chaotic evil queen of the spiders, goddess of all evil, Black Elves, looks African-American on the cover of the 1986 Queen of the Spiders? Again, D&D links dark-skinned African features to evil, so the changes in 2024 D&D were very much needed. And again, this led me to think, what are the origins of the Drow, and is this true? I suspect, and I know now at this point, that Gary and company were referencing much older mythology, Norse mythology, in regards to Dark Elves than they were African-Americans, and so let's dive into that. Drow were first introduced in the AD&D First Edition Monster Manual, this book right here, and I'll read the entry for them. They had no statistic. There was just the basic elf statistic in the Monster Manual, and they had their own little entry that describes them, and it described them as such. The Black Elves, or Drow, are only legend. They purportedly dwell deep beneath the surface in a strange subterranean realm. The Drow are said to be as dark as fairies are bright, and as evil as the latter are good. Tales picture them as weak fighters, but strong magic users. And that's from the Monster Manual, page 39. And again, no stat block was given, just this description of these creatures that it makes it sound like nobody's seen them in a long time, and they're just sort of gone into myth and legend. Maybe the GM can bring them out in AD&D and just use the elf stat block that's in the Monster Manual to kind of tweak it a little bit. But all in all, they're just sort of mentioned as these mythological evil elves that live underground, and they're good at magic. No mention of Lolth, no mention of the Queen of Demon Webs, whatever, they're just these dark evil elves that live under the earth. So let's talk about the mythical origin of elves, of Dark Elves. So in the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson, the Dark Elves are mentioned on page 31, and I'll cite, it's 31 of the source that I've used. It's an online resource of the Prose Edda. You can read it in the link below, and the pinned comment below. I'll have my sources there for you. But it says on page 31 of that particular document, it says, but the Dark Elves dwell in the earth, and they are unlike in appearance, but by far more unlike in nature. The Light Elves are fair to look upon than the sun, but the Dark Elves are blacker than pitch. The basic description, the monster manual, is clearly based on this description of dark elves, of black elves from the Prose Edda. And so, to me, already Ben's comments are undone, and we see that Gary and company, at least initially, are looking at dark elves, and they're like, let's just take this type of elf from Norse mythology and we'll plop it right into D&D. And we'll see this throughout lots of D&D monsters and concepts, that it's just kind of picking things from pulp over here. Let's take Martians from John Carter, stick them in, and we'll take dark elves from Norse mythology and pluck them right in as well and mix them into the same world. Why not, We'll see that a lot, I think, as we go through a lot of these creatures. So I think it's a stretch to say that Gary and company were thinking of Black Americans when they made the Drow. If that was true, then was Snorri Sturluson also thinking of Black Americans in the 13th century? Because, again, the monster manual description is extremely similar to his description in the Prose Edda. I think it's an absurd connection that Ben is making. He's really trying to grasp here. It just is ahistorical, which I would expect better from someone who's claims to be a D&D historian. But I guess he's not a very good D&D historian. He's not a very good, just regular historian as far as mythology is concerned either. And I'm an amateur at this too. So there's this book that I found, and I'll have a link to it on archive.org, called New Studies in Richard Wagner's The Ring of the Nibelung, edited by Herbert W. Richardson. And it says the Svartalfar, which is the black or the black Alfar or the black elf, was also a small creature who lived in the inner regions of the earth. The Edic literature is not specific regarding the home of these beings, but the home is assumed to be Svartalfheim, another of the 9 worlds that existed in early beliefs. The Alfar was quite unlike the light Alfar. Unlike in appearance as well as in nature, it is believed that the descriptive word Svart, black, was attached to these beings as a name, originally because of the blackness of the soil and dirt that surrounded them in their home and which covered their bodies. Much the same can be said about the Decalfar, a nondescript group of dark figures which in time became associated with the Svartalfar. Ultimately, these two kinds of Alfar were fused into a single group, the Svartalfar being the dominant of the two, and that's from pages 3 and 4 of this book. Interestingly, he notes in this book too, and I've seen this in other scholarly work, dwarves and elves are often lumped together in these old stories as types of the same kind of fairy creatures, right? And I think that's very interesting. I think we get this idea of elves and dwarves being two different things from this later concept from Tolkien, that elves and dwarves don't like each other and they're different. In a lot of these ancient myths, Nordic myths, they're sort of used interchangeably. The dwarves and the elves are like just different types of the same sort of fairy fae creatures. So this made me want to give Ben the benefit of the doubt. Like, okay, they say this about the dark elves, that their skin is black because they're covered in this black soil, essentially, which kind of makes them dark as pitch, as the monster manual says. Were the Vikings, were the Norse, were they ever aware of Africans at all, ever? Probably, and it's likely. A Viking fleet is said to have landed in what is present-day Morocco and sacked the city of Nekor for 8 days. This would be around 859 BC. 10th century historian Ibn al-Qutayya, I'm going to butcher that name, and a 13th century historian and geographer Abdullah al-Bakri note these raids occurred. So Vikings raided a North African, Moroccan port city of Nekor for 8 days and then left. Is this enough to logically say that these myths are based on Africans and by extension potentially African Americans? And this is again giving Ben the benefit of the doubt. No, I don't think so. I think the soil explanation, that these are just these beings that live in the ground in very black soil and are thus covered in black soil and are thus black themselves. I think that's a far more likely explanation as to what the Dark Elves are and the origins as far as Norse mythology is concerned. And so then we see Gary and company reading the Prose Edda and these other older mythologies and sort of drawing that out from there. So I think I'm sorry, Ben, your thesis I don't think holds water historically. Svartalfheim is one of the 9 worlds in Norse cosmology. In Carolyn Larrington's translation of the Poetic Edda, we see this realm beneath the earth, and this aligns with the Underdark as expressed in D&D lore. We also need to look at the origin of the word drow. I think this is also very interesting and kind of shows where their mindset is and maybe this concept of their evil comes from. It's derived from the Orcadian and Shetland language of the Scots. Another form of the word is tro with a T. The word was initially used to describe a mischievous troll or hobgoblin, a sprite fairy, a supernatural being common to Scandinavian mythology. And Ed Greenwood, in his 2007 book Dark Warrior Rising, includes an afterword in which he discusses Gaelic dark elves at burial mounds and traditionally humans giving them gifts to stay on their good side. So we have a lot of this lore kind of all over the place of these beings that live in the earth. They live in this dark black soil underground in this mysterious other realm of the underworld, and we see D&D lifting that out for the Underdark, where the Drow live. They're mischievous, as we get from the name Drow or Tro. There's these like hobgoblin troll-like creatures that like to play tricks on you, and in some Gaelic mythology, people gave them offerings so that they wouldn't see any trouble from these creatures, right? Here's some stuff so that you don't have to come and take it from us, take even more from us, right? Leave us alone. Here's some stuff to appease you. So to me, this just sounds like where D&D lore is drawing a lot of concepts for Dark Elves or Drow from. Lolth is the queen of spiders and the queen of the demon web pits. Let's talk about her a little bit. She appears as a beautiful woman in a clothing of spiders, or as a giant spider herself, or what is assumed to be her true form, which is like a giant spider with like the head of a beautiful Drow woman on the front of it. And according to my research, and from what I can see, Lolth is an original creation of Gary Gygax that first appeared in his World of Greyhawk stuff for AD&D. In particular, Module D3, Vault of the Drow, which was a sort of convention competition module that was used back in the day. Yes, D&D competitions were a thing. I would say she's superficially similar to Athena's connection to spiders. One version of Lolth's origin is that she was a goddess who tried to betray her husband, Corellin. When her plots were discovered, she was transformed into a spider demon and banished to the abyss. Athena transforms Arachne into a spider for different reasons, but there's some similarities there, and I want to kind of draw those out. Arachne became boastful and proud in her weaving and challenged Athena herself to a weaving competition. And they spent time, they do the competition to see who can weave the best tapestry. Athena does a tapestry of the gods in glory, and Arachne does one of them in their sort of romances and romantic encounters. Enraged, Athena destroys her tapestry, or Arachne's tapestry, and Arachne attempted to hang herself by the tapestry's thread. Athena transformed the tapestry into webs and Arachne into a spider. Lolth is similar. Story of envy. She thinks she's better than her peers and betters, hence her betrayals, which leads to her downfall, much like Arachne's, and transformation into a spider. This connection is a stretch, I admit, but I'm just trying to look at the mythology that we already know exists and seeing, I don't know if they were looking at Arachne and Athena, but I'm just sort of saying like, hey, it's very similar to this sort of typological storytelling that's going on of don't question the gods, don't be envious or boastful against them, be humble around the gods. And in Lolth's place to her husband Corellin, she was punished for that. And I think given that Lolth is a female, it makes sense that when she's banished to the abyss and starts this culture of dark elves, enslaving them to her religion, that it would be a matriarchal society. I think Lolth also aligns with a lot of the old pulp sorcerers, so H.P. Lovecraft's type stuff, Conan the Barbarian type stuff, even Michael Moorcock type stuff, where there's these powerful, manipulative, and tyrannical sorcerers and wizards and spiritual beings, and they sort of manipulate other mortals to do what it is they want them to do. I think Lolth fits into that perfectly. She's like the perfect pulp villain in a lot of respects, someone that the players can feel heroic against, right, and can engage with, like they can in the gods and the Queen of the Sword trilogy, for example. You know, like the players can do stuff against her that makes them feel heroic because she's just so evil. I also want to point out a humorous connection. We see Linda Carter in 1980 show off the Lolth kind of look in a medley song that she sang in a 1980 music video, which I'll link below too. I'll have a screenshot up here as well, where you can kind of see her look. She comes down on a spider web. She just dressed like Lolth. It's very it was a tribute to Kiss. She did like a medley of a bunch of different popular songs in this, and this Kiss song was one. And she's clearly looks a lot like Lolth, in my opinion, as many people have pointed out. So, in conclusion, let's draw this together here. The Drow are a mix of original ideas and classic mythology. So we have Lolth, who's definitely an original character, kind of drawing, I think, from other classic mythology and pulp concepts to make an original character, an original villain. But the Drow themselves, the Dark Elves themselves in D&D, as we can see from the first edition AD&D Monster Manual, the description is almost lifted straight out and reworded a little bit from the Prose Edda from the 13th century. So I think Ben Riggs' conclusion that these are African Americans being depicted is just not true, tacitly false, just anachronistic. I think that's going to do it for this video, though. This video is already long enough. I don't want these to be super duper long, but I want to do more of these, and I want to do things like werewolves, dragons, all the classic monsters that are in the D&D books that kind of have a link back to ancient mythology. I want to see if we can find a connection there and see if there's anything in past mythology that sort of aligns with this stuff that we can draw from that helps us understand those creatures better or use them better. So if you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, share the video. If you want to support my work and this channel and see more content like this, then you can support on Patreon. You can support right here on YouTube as a member or on my Guilded server. Links to all that will be in the pinned comment below with the sources that I cited in this video. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. I hope you found it informative, interesting. I'm going to make more like this. I think this kind of stuff is fun, and I hope you find it fun. So happy gaming. I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace out.